Good evening, everybody. My name is Rainer, and this is Rainier Books. Earlier today, in the afternoon of Swedish time, Central European time, the Scotiabank Giller Prize Award Longlist was communicated with 14 books on this year's Longlist. And since I haven't got any of these titles, since I haven't read any of these titles, I'm going to read the descriptions of the publisher and tell you my spontaneous reaction if I'm reading it or not. But this is to promote the 14 books that are on the long list of the Canadian Scotiabank Giller Prize Award of 2022. Let's go. And I'm doing this in reverse order of the alphabet. So my first title here is Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson. A struggling author is stuck at the airport. His flight is endlessly delayed. As he kills time at the gate, he bumps into a former classmate of his, Jeff, who's waiting for the same flight. The charismatic Jeff invites the author to drinks in the first-class lounge, and there, swearing him to secrecy, begins telling him the fascinating and disturbing story of his gilded life, starting with a pivotal incident from his youth. Alone on the beach one morning, Jeff notices a swimmer drowning in the rough surf, and so he rescues and resuscitates, the unconscious man before leaving him to the emergency services. But Jeff can't let go of the events of that traumatic day, and he begins to feel compelled to learn more about the man whose life he has saved, convinced that their destinies are now somehow entwined. Upon discovering that the man is the renowned art dealer Francis Arsenault, Jeff begins to surreptitiously visit his Beverly Hills gallery, eventually applying there for a job. Although Francis doesn't seem to recognize him, he nevertheless casts his legendary eye over Jeff and sees something of worth, and so he initiates him into his world of unimaginable power and wealth, where knowledge, taste, and access are currency, and the value of things is constantly shifting, constantly calling into question what is real and what matters. As Jeff finds himself seduced by the lifestyle, he pursues a deeper connection with Francis until morals become expendable and their relationship becomes ever darker, leaving him to wonder, should he have just let Francis drown? Well, this sounds like a psychological book to me, like a drama book, but also somehow like a thriller, and it could be interesting. And so I would vote yes on that one, on the question, are you interested in reading this? The second one, and this is a very diverse long list. That's what I saw when I flipped over the books and looked over the books and at the authors. We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies by Tsering Yangzom Lama. This is about immigrants in Canada from Tibet. This is a span of 50 years. The story, this Lamo and her younger sister Tanki, they arrive at a refugee camp in Nepal when China is invading Tibet. And years after that, decades after that, the sisters are separated, and Tanki is living with Lamo's daughter Dolma in Toronto, Canada. When Tanki works as a cleaner and struggles with traumatic memories, Dolma vies for a place as a scholar of Tibetan studies. But when Dolma comes across the nameless saint in a collector's vault, she must decide what she's willing to do for her community, even if it means risking her dreams. Breathtaking in its scope and powerful in its intimacy, We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies is a gorgeously written meditation on colonization, displacement, and the lengths we'll go to remain connected to our families. It's a moving portrait of the little-known world of Tibetan exiles, and that's what makes this title so interesting, I think. We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies by Tsering Yangzom Lama. What We Both Know, a Math Story by Fawn Parker. For readers of My Dark Vanessa, it says here, in front of me are hundreds of pages of work. Already I feel it leaving me. He will obliterate what is there, replace it, deny I ever wrote a word, but he cannot take the words I write on my own. Hilary Green's father, once a celebrated author and public figure, is now losing his memory, and with it, his ability to write. As her father's primary caretaker, each day begins with 2 eggs boiled and Charlie Rose or some other host on the iPad screen. Her father compulsively watches himself in old interviews, memorizing his own speech, trying to hang on to who he was. An aspiring author herself, Hilary impulsively agrees to ghostwrite his final work, a memoir spanning his career, and release it in his name. Diving deep into her father's past and in turn her own, a horrifying truth begins to piece itself together. Set in the wake of #MeToo and Time's Up movements, what we both know is a visceral, intimate, and complex novel about confronting the personal and professional consequences and potentially devastating fallout of revealing the truth about a famous man. What a list, I say, because 3 books and all of them sound very interesting and very diverse. We had the first book, which deals with a psychological thriller, the second book with Tibetan immigrants, the third book with the #MeToo movement. The fourth one is also very interesting. It's about the 1980s. This is Hotline by Dimitri Nasrallah. A vivid love letter to the 80s and one woman's struggle to overcome the challenges of immigration. In 1986, it's 1986 and Muna Haddad is in a bind. She and her son have moved to Montreal, leaving behind a civil war filled with bad memories in Lebanon. She had plans to find work as a French teacher, but no one in Quebec trusts her to teach the language. She needs to start making money and fast. The only work she can find is at a weight loss center as a hotline operator. All day, she takes calls from people responding to ads seen in magazines or on TV. On the phone, she's Mona, and she's quite good at listening. These strangers all have so much to say once someone shows interest in their lives, marriages gone bad, parents dying, isolation, personal inadequacies. Even as her daily life in Canada is filled with invisible barriers at every turn, at the office, Muna is privy to her clients' deepest secrets. Following international acclaim for Nico in 2011 and The Bleeds in 2018, Dimitri Nasrallah has written a vivid elegy to the 1980s, the years he first moved to Canada, bringing the era's systemic challenges into the current moment through his deeply endearing portrait of struggle, perseverance, and bonding. Also, yes to that book. Lucian and Olivia by André Narbonne. This is a new novel by Windsor-based writer André Narbonne, who's the author of 12 Days Till Midnight. This new work in a comic statement on the beautiful waywardness of life, built on scenes of discovery and error, and the novel satirizes the transactional view of human relations that has elbowed its way into our lives by way of contemporary political discourse. Set in the 1980s, before cell phones, personal computers and Facebook likes, a comic tone pervades a serious landscape onto which characters attempt to bring personal meaning. The protagonist, Lucien, is a marine engineer on a Canadian tanker. While on 1 month leave in Halifax, he meets Olivia, a brilliant philosopher student at Dalhousie University, who takes an immediate dislike to him. What begins as mutual antipathy changes when they discover how compatible their oddities are. Lucien returns to sea in a job characterized by its plodding predictability. When he learns from a French fortune teller that he must avoid waters will kill you, he discovers not everything in his life is negotiable, including his feelings for Olivia. A fascinating and different work of fiction. This is not so sort of igniting a fire in me to read this one, actually. We have another book here that is called If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. In the aftermath of the Arab Spring, an Egyptian-American woman and a man from the village of Shubrakite meet at a cafe in Cairo. He was a photographer of the revolution, but now finds himself unemployed and addicted to cocaine, living in a rooftop shack. She's a nostalgic daughter of immigrants returning to a country she's never been to before, teaching English and living in a light-filled flat with balconies on all sides. They fall in love and he moves in, but soon their desire for one another, for the selves they want to become through the other, takes a violent turn that neither of them expected. A dark romance exposing the gaps in American identity politics, especially when exported overseas. If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English is at once ravishing and wry, scathing and tender. Told in alternating perspectives, Noor Naga's experimental debut examines the ethics of fetishizing the homeland and punishing the beloved and vice versa. In our globalized 21st century world, what are the new faces of empire? When the revolution falls, how long can someone survive the disappointment? Who suffers? And more crucially, who gets to tell about it? Is this a list? This is a list. The Sleeping Car Porter by Suzette Meyer. When a mudslide strands a train, Baxter, a queer black sleeping car porter, must contend with the perils of white passengers, ghosts, and a secret love affair. The sleeping car porter brings to life an important part of black history in North America. from the perspective of a queer man living in a culture that renders him invisible in two ways: affecting, imaginative, and visceral enough that you'll feel the rocking of the train. The sleeping car porter is a stunning accomplishment. Well, sounds okay. I'm not so intrigued by this one here, actually. Avenue of Champions by Conor Kerr. Daniel is a young Métis man searching for a way to exist in a world of lateral violence, intergenerational trauma, and systemic racism. Facing obstacles of his own at every turn, he observes and learns from the lived realities of his family members, friends, teachers, and lovers. Set in Edmonton, Alberta, the story considers Indigenous youth in relation to the urban constructs and colonial spaces in which they survive, from violence, whitewashing, trauma, and racism to language revitalization, relationships with elders, restaking land claims, and ultimately triumph. Based on Pappas Chase and Métis oral histories and lived experience, Conor Kerr's debut novel will not soon be forgotten. Great. All the Quiet Places by Brian Thomas Isaac is another First Nation book. It's 1956 and 6-year-old Eddie Toma lives with his mother Grace and his little brother Louis near the Salmon River on the far edge of the Okanagan Indian Reserve in the British Columbia southern interior. Grace, her friend Isabel's husband Ray, and his nephew Gregory cross the border to work as summer farm laborers in Washington state. There, Eddie is free to spend long days with Gregory exploring the farm, climbing a hill to watch the sunset and listening to the wind in the grass. The boys learn from Ray's funny and dark stories, but when tragedy strikes, Eddie returns home grief-stricken, confused, and lonely. Eddie's life is governed by the decisions of the adults around him. Grace is determined to have him learn the ways of the white world by sending him to school in the small community of Falkland. On Eddie's first day of school, as he crosses the reserve boundary at the Salmon River bridge, he leaves behind his world. Grace challenges the Indian agent and writes futile letters to Ottawa to protest the sparse resources in their community. His father returns to the family after years away, only to bring chaos and instability. Only in his grandmother's company does he find solace and true companionship. All the Quiet Places is the story of what can happen when every adult in a person's life has been affected by colonialism. It tells of the acute separation from culture that can occur even at home in a loved, familiar landscape. Its narrative power relies on the unguarded, unsentimental witness provided by Eddie. Pure Color by Sheila Heti. Here we are, just living in the first draft of creation, which was made by some great artist who's now getting ready to tear it apart. In this first draft, a woman named Mira leaves home for school. There she meets Annie, whose tremendous power opens Mira's chest like a portal to what she doesn't know. When Mira is older, her beloved father dies and she enters the strange and dizzying dimensions that true loss opens up. It is a contemporary Bible, an atlas of feeling, and a shape-shifting epic. A philosopher, the author Sheila Heti is a philosopher of modern experience, and she has reimagined what a book can hold. Not my piece of cake directly. But that is Stray Dogs from Rawi Hage in Montreal. A photographer's unexpected encounter with actress Sophia Loren leads to a life-altering revelation about his dead mother. In Beirut, a disillusioned geologist eagerly awaits the destruction that will come with an impending tsunami. In Tokyo, a Jordanian academic delivers a lecture at a conference receives haunting news from the Persian Gulf. And in Berlin, a Lebanese writer forms a fragile, fateful bond with his voluble German neighbors. Irresistible characters in this collection of short stories, politically astute, philosophically wise, it says, humane, relevant, and caustically funny. These stories reveal the singular vision of award-winning writer Rawi Hage at his best. And even more stories. The second story collection in the Longlist of the Scotiabank Giller Prize is Lesser Known Monsters of the 21st Century by Kim Fu. In the 12 unforgettable tales of lesser-known monsters of the 21st century, the strange is made familiar and the familiar strange, such that a girl growing wings on her legs feels like an ordinary rite of passage, while a bog-infested house becomes an impossible Kafkaesque nightmare. Each story builds a new world of its own. A group of children steal a haunted doll, a runaway bride encounters a sea monster, a vendor sells toy boxes that seemingly control the passage of time. And stuff like this. Sounds very strange and very interesting. One of those rare collections that never suffers from which one was that again syndrome. Every story here lights a flame in the memory, shining brighter as time goes by rather than dimming. Kim Fu writes with grace, wit, mischief, daring, and her own deep, weird, phosphorescent understanding. Great. In the City of Pigs by André Forget. Alexander Otkazov is finished with Montreal. Having wasted his youth on the love of art, he's ready for a life of anonymous condo towers and profitable boredom. But when he moves to Toronto, he's forced into a monkish existence by the unforgiving pressures of the city, until he stumbles across a story about an ambitious experimental music collective that could be his ticket to a better job and a better life. So, a life-changing event here in that book. And the last one of the Scotiabank Giller Prize, but not least, of course, is A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Belcourt. An urgent first novel, an unnamed narrator abandons his unfinished thesis and returns to northern Alberta in search of what eludes him, the shape of the novel he yearns to write, an autobiography of his rural hometown, the answers to existential questions about family, love, and happiness. What ensues is a series of conversations, connections, and disconnections that reveals the texture of life in a town where the friction between possibility and constraint provides an insistent background score. Whether he's meeting with an auntie distraught over the imprisonment of her grandson, engaging in rash gossip with his cousin at a powwow, or lingering in bed with a married man after a hotel room hookup, the narrator makes space for those in his orbit to divulge their private joys and miseries, testing the theory that storytelling can make us feel less lonely. Populated by characters as alive and vast as the boreal forest and culminating in a breathtaking crescendo, A Minor Chorus is a novel about how deeply entangled the sayable and unsayable can become, and about how ordinary life, when pressed, can produce hauntingly beautiful music. That was the Scotiabank Giller Prize Longlist. I hope that you have one or two or three books that you like from this list. I will definitely get myself a couple of these. I will tell you in one of my next videos which one I choose. I like this list. It's very diverse, has three titles from the First Nations of Canada, has the immigration topic of the Tibetan literature, and it has some psychological thrillers in it. A lot for almost each and everyone. Great Canadian list, read Canadian literature, and I see you very soon on this channel. Thank you very much. Bye-bye and good night.